I worked underground utility maintenance for the city for nearly 9 years before I was assigned to Sector C. Most people never think about the infrastructure beneath them. They drive over streets, walk through government buildings, sit inside hospitals, and assume everything simply works. They don't think about the miles of tunnels carrying power lines, communication cables, emergency systems, and utility conduits beneath the city. I used to be one of those people. Then I started working underground, and eventually I was transferred to Sector C. Nobody wanted Sector C. I didn't understand why. At first, the transfer happened after 2 senior technicians retired within a few months of each other. Management needed experienced workers. I had a clean record, years of tunnel maintenance experience, and no reason to refuse. The briefing took place in a maintenance office below a government administration complex. There were only 4 people present: my supervisor, a mapping specialist, a technician named Torres, and me. The supervisor handed me a thin folder. "Read the first page." I opened it. 3 rules were printed in bold. Never rely on yesterday's map. Mark every junction manually. If a corridor appears twice, leave immediately. I looked up. What does that mean? Nobody answered immediately. The mapping specialist stared at the table. Torres looked toward the door. The supervisor finally spoke. "It means exactly what it says." I laughed. Nobody else did. That should have concerned me more than it did. Sector C occupied one of the oldest underground utility networks in the city. Decades of expansion projects had created a maze beneath government buildings, transit infrastructure, and administrative facilities. The tunnels weren't abandoned. Far from it. Critical systems still ran through them. Power distribution, emergency communication lines, water controls, monitoring equipment. The city depended on them, which made the stories harder to ignore. My first month felt normal. Long inspections, routine maintenance, equipment checks. Nothing unusual. The tunnels themselves looked exactly like every other utility system I'd worked in. Concrete walls, cable trays overhead, rows of conduits disappearing into darkness, maintenance lights spaced at regular intervals. The same humming electrical background noise, the same stale recycled air, the same feeling of being disconnected from the world above. No weather, no sunlight, no sense of time. Just corridors. Endless corridors. The first thing I noticed wasn't an anomaly. It was the behavior of the workers. Everyone carried 2 maps, the official city map and a personal map, handwritten, updated constantly. Nobody trusted the official version. I assumed that was because documentation lagged behind renovations. Then I compared maps. They weren't just different, they disagreed completely. Entire routes existed on one version and not the other. Junction numbers shifted, access rooms moved, dead-end corridors appeared and disappeared. When I asked Torres about it, he shrugged. "You'll stop asking eventually." That answer bothered me more than it should have. The first anomaly happened 6 weeks later. I was inspecting a communications route near junction C14. Nothing unusual had happened all shift. I recorded equipment readings, checked cable supports, updated maintenance notes. Then I looked up at the wall marker. The sign read C15. I frowned. I checked my notebook. The previous marker had definitely been C13. I remembered writing C14 only minutes earlier. I walked back. The previous junction still read C13. I walked forward again. C15. No C14 existed. I spent 15 minutes searching. No hidden corridor, no missing sign, no explanation. Just a missing junction. I reported it at the end of the shift. The supervisor barely reacted. "Did you update your map?" "Yes." "Good." That was the entire conversation. Over time, I learned something strange about Sector C. The anomalies weren't dramatic, not at first. Nothing jumped out of the darkness, nothing chased workers, nothing attacked anyone. Instead, the tunnels slowly undermined certainty. You stopped trusting measurements, stopped trusting distances, stopped trusting memory. A corridor that normally took 5 minutes to walk might take 7, then 5 again, then 6. A maintenance room might be exactly where it should be for months, then suddenly appear one junction farther down the route. Most workers never discuss these things openly. The strange events existed in an uncomfortable middle ground. too consistent to ignore, too subtle to prove. About 3 months into the assignment, I experienced something that changed the way I navigated underground. I was working a solo night shift. Night inspections were common because utility demand was lower. The tunnel system felt different after midnight, quieter. The hum of electrical equipment seemed louder. The spaces between sounds seemed larger. I reached junction C31 around 2 in the morning, completed my inspection, marked the wall, and continued down a straight corridor. 15 minutes later, I arrived at another junction. The sign above it read C31. I stopped. The corridor behind me was perfectly straight. No turns, no branches, no alternate routes. Yet somehow, I had walked from C31 to another C31. My stomach tightened. I remembered the rule. If a corridor appears twice, leave immediately. I turned around and started walking back. The return trip felt wrong. The tunnel seemed longer than before. The lights seemed farther apart. The hum of equipment sounded distant, almost muted. When I finally reached the previous junction, the sign above it read C30, not C31, C30. I stared at it for nearly a minute. Then I left. Fast. I didn't report that incident immediately. For the first time, I understood why everyone carried personal maps. Official records couldn't help you if the environment itself changed. Winter brought heavier maintenance demands. Crews spent longer hours underground. The anomalies became harder to dismiss. One technician swore he found a valve room in the wrong location. Another reported seeing maintenance markings he didn't remember making. A third claimed a corridor dead-ended where it had previously continued for hundreds of feet. Nobody could prove any of it, but everyone started checking their maps more often. Torres eventually explained something that had bothered me for months. We were replacing cable supports deep within the network, several miles from the nearest access point. I asked him what he thought was actually happening. He stared down the tunnel before answering. The maps aren't the problem. What is? The tunnels. He didn't elaborate. At the time, I thought he was being cryptic. Later, I realized he was being literal. The city eventually hired outside consultants to create an updated digital survey. For a few weeks, Sector C became crowded with engineers carrying laser scanners and imaging equipment. Management believed modern technology would finally solve the mapping discrepancies. The opposite happened. The survey produced a master map. According to that map, several corridors didn't exist. Unfortunately, crews used those corridors every day. The consultants insisted their data was accurate. The city insisted the tunnels were accurate. Neither side could explain the contradiction. One consultant quit halfway through the project. I met him while he was loading equipment into a truck. His hands were shaking. I asked if something had happened. He glanced toward access hatch 7, then looked back at me. Your maps aren't wrong. What does that mean? He hesitated, then quietly said, neither are ours. He drove away that afternoon. I never saw him again. After that, I started paying closer attention, not just to routes, to details, wall stains, paint marks, utility labels, small things. One night, I noticed a scratch on a conduit support near junction C22, a distinctive mark shaped like a hook. I remembered it because I had accidentally made it months earlier while moving equipment. The following week, I found the same scratch near C28, the exact same scratch, same location, same depth, same shape, as if part of the tunnel had been copied and moved. I spent 20 minutes comparing photographs. The evidence was undeniable. The mark existed in both places. I never told anyone. By then, I wasn't sure I wanted answers. The major incident happened during my 7th month in Sector C. 3 of us were assigned to inspect a communications relay route. Torres, a newer technician named Ellis, and me. The route was familiar. We had traveled it dozens of times. The shift began normally. Routine inspections, equipment readings, maintenance checks. Several hours passed without incident. Then Ellis stopped walking. Fresh chalk markings covered one wall. A large arrow pointed into a side corridor. Did one of you draw this? Neither of us answered, because none of us had. The chalk looked fresh, only hours old. Another arrow appeared farther ahead, then another, each one pointing deeper into the network. We followed them, At first, because we assumed another crew had been working nearby. Then, because curiosity took over. The corridor extended farther than any map suggested. The air felt unusually still. The maintenance lights seemed dimmer. The walls looked older, not damaged, older. As if we had crossed into a section built decades before the surrounding infrastructure. Eventually, we reached a junction. The marker above it read C-47. Ellis checked his map, then checked it again. There is no C-47. My pulse quickened, because I recognized the junction. I had seen it before. Months earlier, several miles away. Same utility cabinets, same wall damage, same pipe supports, the exact same location. It existed twice. Nobody spoke. Then we heard footsteps. Slow, measured, somewhere beyond the illuminated section of tunnel. The sound wasn't an echo. It was too consistent, too deliberate. Someone was walking. The footsteps continued. One step, then another, approaching gradually through the darkness. Torres switched off his flashlight. The rest of us did the same. We stood motionless, listening. The footsteps kept coming, not rushing, not hiding, just walking, like someone performing a routine inspection route. Then, for a brief moment, a silhouette crossed the edge of the light. Human-shaped, far away, too far to identify. The footsteps stopped. Silence filled the tunnel, the kind of silence that feels unnatural underground. Nobody moved. Several seconds passed. Then we heard something else. A metallic scratching sound, like chalk against concrete, slow, methodical. Somewhere ahead. Ellis whispered, "What is that?" Nobody answered. Because none of us knew. The scratching continued. A few seconds later, a new sound joined it. Footsteps. Again. This time moving away, deeper into the darkness. Torres immediately said, "We're leaving." Nobody argued. We turned around and started back. The return route was wrong. Not dramatically, just wrong. A maintenance cabinet appeared twice. A utility room occupied the opposite side of the corridor. A junction arrived sooner than expected, then later than expected. The deeper problem wasn't that things had changed. It was that none of us could agree on how they had changed. At one point, Ellis insisted we had already passed a particular wall marking. Torres swore we hadn't. I honestly couldn't tell. The tunnel seemed to resist certainty. Eventually, we reached a familiar section, then another, then access hatch 7. Nobody spoke during the elevator ride. Nobody spoke while completing reports. Management reviewed our statements. The official explanation cited navigation errors. Nobody believed it, least of all Ellis. He resigned 2 weeks later. Torres transferred out 6 months afterward. I stayed. Partly because I needed the job. Partly because I couldn't stop thinking about those footsteps. Years have passed since then. I no longer work in Sector C. Most days I barely think about it. Most days. A month ago I was cleaning old storage boxes when I found one of my handwritten field maps. The map I carried during my time underground. I spread it across my kitchen table. Examined every route, every notation, every correction. Everything looked normal until I noticed a section I had never seen before. A hand-drawn corridor, a junction labeled C-47, and beside it, written in my own handwriting, were 4 words. Do not follow the arrows. I have no memory of writing them, none. I checked old notebooks, old reports, old photographs. Nothing explained it. But that wasn't the worst part. A week later, I looked at the map again. The corridor was gone. The warning remained. The junction remained. But the corridor connecting them had disappeared, as if it had never been drawn. I've considered showing the map to someone. A historian, a former coworker, maybe even Torres. But I haven't, because there's one possibility I can't stop thinking about. The arrows we followed that night led us to a junction that existed in 2 places. What if they weren't guiding us somewhere? What if they were guiding us around something? And if that's true, who was leaving them? Because somewhere beneath the city, beyond the routes shown on any official record, there may still be corridors that shift when nobody is watching. Corridors that occasionally connect to places they shouldn't. corridors where someone continues marking walls with fresh chalk. And if the footsteps we heard belonged to another maintenance worker, then one question remains. Who exactly were they working for?